Hi, I'm Brent Stafford, and welcome to another edition of RegWatch on GFN.TV. The country of Mexico is about to embark down a very dark and dangerous path. Newly installed President Claudia Sheinbaum is close to making good on her predecessor's promise to enshrine a complete ban on nicotine vaping products into Mexico's constitution. It's an extraordinary overreach aimed at overriding Mexico's Supreme Court, which has repeatedly overturned vaping bans. But many fear this move will hand over a booming black market to Mexico's most violent and entrepreneurial criminal organizations. Joining us today to talk through the impact is Thomas O'Gorman, a lawyer and vaping advocate and co-founder of the advocacy group Pro Vapeo Mexico. Thomas, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Brent.
Well, there's a lot of things here for us to unpack. We've been covering this Mexico issue for a while now, but first tell us a bit about what you do as a lawyer and how you became an advocate for vaping.
Well, I practice private law. I prepare deeds and documents like that, last wills, etc. And I also teach at the Universidad Panamericana, or Pan American University here in Mexico City. I teach two courses. One is corporations law, and the other one is succession law, which is the one that has to be or is related to last wills and successions. I became an advocate because I quit smoking in 2016. And to be fair, I wasn't really seeking to quit. I mean, I bought my first e-cigarette in order not to get to the street to have a cigarette. And after I started vaping, maybe in 2-3 weeks more so, one weekend I decided not to buy any cigarettes, and I stopped smoking. And then I started studying, the Royal College of Physicians document, the Public Health England e-cigarettes review, or the one they made in 2015. And it was so clear to me that this was an amazing alternative for smokers. And I must confess, I got a little bit angry because of the misinformation that was being spread. I was a victim of misinformation. I previous to that, I thought it was not a good option. So I had the fortune to meet Roberto Sussman and Juan José Siriorli, and we decided to incorporate or to create Pro Vapeo Mexico in order to have a platform so we could do some advocacy and try to show that this was real and a great alternative for smokers.
How effective has that been?
As you said, we're facing a constitutional ban, so we are losing badly the battle.
Now, how extraordinary is this constitutional ban, and will it be a mistake?
Mexico has had a ban on the commercialization of vaping products since forever. I mean, since the first documents I can find, or the first mentions I find of the prohibition, come from 2010. The thing is that putting this in the Constitution is pretty crazy. The prohibition itself is absurd. It doesn't matter if the prohibition is contained in a law or in a decree or any other government document. But putting the prohibition in the Constitution, especially in articles that grant or recognize human rights, it's like out of any rationality. And the problem regarding such a prohibition is that it is going to be very difficult to reverse it. It comes from the previous president desires. Mr. López Obrador banned vaping by a decree in 2022 after the Supreme Court in 2021 ruled that the existing ban in the law was unconstitutional. And in February 5th of this year, he filed several amendments or bills to amend the Constitution. And one of those bills is the one related to vaping, to banning vaping in the Constitution.
Now, the current president, tell us about her and the party, because she's a successor, correct?
Yes. Our current president is Mrs. Claudia Sheinbaum. She is a successor of Andrés Manuel López Obrador. She is part of the ruling party called Morena. which is in theory a left-oriented party. The thing is that even though she is a scientist, she is pursuing the same goals in regard to vaping that Mr. López Obrador wanted. And therefore, I mean, she has been very clear on the fact that this amendment is in course. Of course, it has to be voted in the Congress, both in the Cámara de Diputados, which is properly the Congress where the representatives are, and in the Senate. And because of last June's elections gave the supermajority to the Morena party, they are able to amend the Constitution even though the opposition votes against any thing put into a vote. They have enough diputados, representatives, and enough senators to change the Constitution and do whatever they want.
So what does the ban cover?
Well, the ban covers. It's funny because they are changing two articles in our Constitution. They are amending Article 4, which is the article that recognizes and protects the right to health. And they are, in that article, they are banning all activities regarding to marketing, production, distribution, fabrication of these products. I mean, all the commercialization in general terms. And they are also amending or modifying Article 5, which enshrines or protects the right to work and consequently the freedom of commerce. So they ban the activity itself in Article 4, and they ban the possibility of a person or a corporation to dedicate to work in such activity.
So in the area of the Constitution that's enshrining commerce, saying commerce is, you have the right to actually be engaged in commerce, except for this one thing in the Constitution, you can't be engaged in this commerce.
Yes, actually, the previous rulings of the court against the prohibition were basically based on the freedom of commerce. So what they are doing is they are amending the Constitution in order to ban the possibility or to have this freedom for corporations or for persons, for people to do activities as professionals related to vaping. The ban does not cover use, at least not yet. But of course, as everybody can figure out, the idea of banning not use, but all aspects regarding to commercialization and production and the activity itself, of course, it's oriented to take from us, from smokers, and in my case, from vapers, the possibility to find these products in Mexico. And actually, it also stops you or forbids you from getting them from abroad, of course, because also importation and exportation are banned.
Now, is the rationalization for this, the typical save the children?
Yes, actually, if you read the bill, it says that in order to protect the right to health, they are banning vaping. And of course, it's only a narrative because it's a narrative based on lies and misinterpretations of scientific facts. If you see what we call the exposición de motivos, which is the arguments that any bill has to have in order to justify the reasons why it is being filed, it says several things that do not agree with the scientific evidence. Actually, they say in this bill that it says that vaping causes more damage and quicker than combustible cigarette. Which is funny because no one has died from nicotine vaping. But anyway, the thing is that López Obrador, the former president, took vaping almost like as a personal thing, and I guess that because of the court in several occasions ruled that the ban was unconstitutional, because the court not only considered unconstitutional the existing provision in the general tobacco law, after he issued his decree in 2022, several amparo trials were granted to people and to corporations in order to consider unconstitutional the decree itself, his presidential decree. So he said, okay, you are regarding this provision unconstitutional. Well, I'm going to put it in the Constitution, so you can no longer consider it unconstitutional.
Yeah, it's actually quite striking how often the Supreme Court has overturned these decrees or rules that were created. And so clearly this is all about putting something in that is no longer going to have the oversight of the Supreme Court of Mexico.
Yes, there were in Mexico, there is something called amparo trial. It's a legal procedure when the government or any authority does something that affects your human rights or is illegal or unconstitutional. You can file this trial in order to make not applicable to you such disposition. And since the previous ban, or the one existing, because it's still enacted in the law, in the General Tobacco Law, and then with the decree, several amparo trials were won. So actually today, until we get this provision, this next or new provision, you have companies and you have people that are legally selling the products in Mexico because they have won amparos. So you have a black market coexisting with a legal but unregulated market, if you consider these people that have these amparos granted by the Supreme Court or by federal judges.
So for people that didn't quite get it, we're talking about a legal exception that has been, this is in other industries too, but in this particular case, there are legally operating vaping product distribution and so forth because of these amparos.
Yes, because one of the characteristics of the amparo trial is called the relativity principle. And what it says is that the sentence of an amparo only protects the person or the entity that filed the suit, that filed the lawsuit. So even though they are considering unconstitutional and that's the precedent that has already been set, if you don't file, if you're not a company and you don't file this amparo trial, then and you pursue or you still sell these products, you will be breaching the decree or the law. But if you want amparo, then you are not doing something illegal, because the effect of the sentence is that they take away from your interest realm the application of such law or of such decree. In this case, the ban of the decree that bans vaping.
So we're taping this just right towards the end here of November, and this will be released on December 6th. So is there any chance the amendment's going to pass in the next 10 days, or is it something that's going to happen next year?
Well, Brent, sadly, it is very possible that at least it will be approved by the Chamber of Diputados or the Congress. This morning, I just received notice that they are considering to put the bill into a vote on next week. And to be fair, I am not sure if the Senate will then proceed to vote in this year, or they are going to do it next year. I guess they will do it this year. So it is very likely that by the time that this interview is broadcasted, the provision in the Constitution will be a fact.
That's less than 2 weeks. I mean, we're coming up here to U.S. Thanksgiving. So December 6th is the end of next week. Oh, my goodness.
If you consider that vaping has been banned since around 2010, we did not experience real serious black market problems from 2010 to at least 2018, when the current regime arrived. And I guess that's because it was a very poorly enforced prohibition. I mean, we even have expos, vape expos. Actually, some of them took place in the other side of the same street where COFEPRIS is placed, and COFEPRIS is our FDA, our sanitary authority or our health regulator authority. So these vapectos were taking place just in front of them. And because the provision was poorly enforced, I mean, there were some acts of authority enforcing it, but they were very scarce, and usually the shops that got subject of such acts from the government, they got amparo trial, they got favorable sentences. But when the current regime arrived in 2018, they started being more aggressive towards the enforcement of the existing prohibition. In 2020, they actually started. First, the president issued a decree banning the importation and exportation in order to complement the existing prohibition in the law. Then they modified the law that establishes the taxes for importation and exportation. So they forbade the importation and exportation of these products. They also wanted to ban the commercialization of vaping in the law, but that particular bill was not voted. And after the Supreme Court ruled in October of 2021 that the existing ban in the general tobacco law was unconstitutional, then on May 31st of 2022, coincidentally in the World No Tobacco Day, Mr. López Obrador issued this decree in order to ban vaping. Because several amparo trials were granted considering or deeming this decree as unconstitutional, that's what I believe that's the reason why Mr. López Obrador filed this bill in order to amend the Constitution and to establish the provision within the Constitution itself. And as they have the supermajority, it's being voted as, and I don't make a lot of expectations in regard to this. They have made in the last few weeks so many changes to the Mexican Constitution that I don't have much hopes that this will not pass, because I guess it will.
What role does Michael Bloomberg and the WHO have in making this happen in Mexico?
Well, I mean, there is no question that the NGOs sponsored by Mr. Bloomberg have influence in this. There have been several signs. I mean, the first one was that the law I just told you that never passed, the one that was going to ban vaping a few years ago, it was not voted because something that is called the dictamen, which is it's like the document that the Health Committee of the Congress and in that time also the Commerce Committee or the Economy Committee, but it's the document that is put to vote. It's something called dictamen, which is like the authorization from these committees within the Congress, where they analyze and they make modifications to a bill, and they define the final text of what is going to be voted by the diputados and by the senators. The draft of such dictamen it transcended in the news at some point that the draft, the PDF file, had been written not by a diputado or by the personally within the Congress. It has been written by an attorney of Tobacco Free Kids. So you can have a very clear idea if there is an enormous influence if they are writing their documents that they are voting. And another example, and the most clear example of that, happened on February the 5th during the COP, in the first day of the COP, the very same day in which this bill was proposed or was filed in the Congress in order to ban vaping, the representative or the delegate for Mexico in the COP said that the country had the support of the Bloomberg Initiative. I guess those are the words he used. So, I mean, it's very, very clear that there is an enormous influence from the Bloomberg Initiative in what is happening in Mexico.
That must be frustrating that an outside party like that is influencing an amendment to a country's constitution.
It is not also frustrating. It's very sad because in Mexico the rates of tobacco consumption, of smoking, have not decreased in the last at least 12 years. If you use the ENSA it's something called like Encuesta Nacional de Salud y Nutrición, which is kind of a survey made by the government. If you compare the rates in 2012, they were around 19.9% in the adult population. And if you see at least I remember now the result from the 2022 survey, the adult population that was smoking was around like 19.5%, if I remember correctly. The thing is that if you consider the growth of the population, it's very, very likely that we have more smokers now than in 2012. So the provision itself is bad. Putting in the Constitution it's quite crazy because at the end, the only thing that they are protecting at a constitutional level is the black market they are creating and that they are promoting with this ban. And they are also protecting smoking because, I mean, people will keep smoking as they won't be able to access any alternatives.
Yeah, I believe the number is 1.7 million vapors in Mexico. And so they're obviously, and they're going to obviously be challenged to not go back to smoking. Thomas, it seems to me that enforcing such a sweeping and rigid ban on nicotine vapes would create a prime opportunity for organized crime to dominate the black market with its typical ruthless efficiency. Do you feel the same way?
Yes. As I was telling you, as long as the enforcement becomes more strong, and the provision is set in the secondary laws that will come after this constitutional amendment, of course the organized crime will have will seek to take these because as an activity becomes more and more forbidden, if you can talk about levels. I mean, the level, something is allowed or it's forbidden, of course, but you can also have some kind of a spectrum because it depends on how the government applies the ban. If they start getting after shops and after people selling these products, of course the organized crime will see an opportunity, and they have already been doing that, it seems. To take over this market with all the negative consequences that this brings to the society, because as you know, these kind of very dark and black markets are quite violent, and I think it will expose vapers to pretty bad products and even the possibility of adulterated products.
Thomas, it strikes me as strange the relationship that you've described between higher enforcement by the government. So stricter enforcement will lead to more organized crime.
Yes, because what I was referring to is that the government will, of course, enforce the ban in visible shops or the ones that are not related to the crime, to the organized crime. So when you have a ban and it's poorly enforced, and it happened in Mexico before 2018, they were shops actually very openly selling the products. As I was telling you, there were even expos. And the ban itself was softer because it was an administrative ban. I mean, as I understand it, the worst that could happen to you was to have to pay a fine. But now that it's becoming, for instance, now that the importation is forbidden, then actually in getting these products from abroad, it's already a crime. And if they also completely ban the commercialization in the secondary laws that will result of the constitutional amendment, The thing is that the black market will become more deeper, will go deep. It will go to the very obscure, or I believe it may go to these very obscure places, and it won't be so evident. So what will happen is that the people that were selling these products more openly will disappear, and what will remain is a more darker activity, usually related to that kind of crime, also organized crime. The thing is that a black market always produces a lot of negative consequences. I mean, there is not a single positive consequence derived from a prohibition of this nature. Of course, as you have been saying, the black market and the possibility of violence is terrible. But also consider the smokers. I mean, people will be deprived of alternatives to quit smoking through the most efficient way to quit smoking, which is vaping. And vapers like me that already have quit smoking, well, we will be at some point possibly be in the point to decide if we abandon completely the consumption of nicotine, or if we go back to cigarettes, because they are not banning cigarettes, and there is a very big, not only legal but also illegal market of cigarettes, because there are a lot of counterfeited, illegal brands or smuggled cigarettes in Mexico, besides that the ones that are legally sold.
So what will you do and others who vape in Mexico once this hard ban comes down?
I don't know. I mean, I would like to think that I'll be able to find liquids to continue vaping. But the thing is that if at some point that implies some risk for my person or for my family, even legal risks, I might go back to smoking if I cannot stay abstinent from nicotine, because at least in my case, I know it's a dependence. I don't care. It really helps me to function every day, and I do like it. So it depends on how the ban is interpreted and how it arrives. Once it is established in the Constitution, then they have to make or amend existing laws or make new laws in order to apply the ban, because the ban itself in the Constitution needs to be introduced in a law in order to become effective. And it depends what they are going to do, and it also depends how they are going to consider the ban, and if they are going to also try to persecute users. Who knows? I mean, that's not the scope of the ban as it is in the project, but you never know. And in a country in which rule of law has been lost, or at least is not being considered important by the government, I don't know what they are going to do at the end. But the thing is that what it is very likely is that the provision is going to be introduced in the Constitution within a couple of weeks, or maybe in January, but it's almost a fact.
Is there any hope?
I had a little bit hope, because I know of lawmakers, even members of the ruling party, that consider that this ban is not a good idea. In a country like ours, and in any other LMIC, these alternatives could play a very great role in order to help people, because they are not only helping people to avoid all these smoking-related diseases, they are also helping these people to avoid not receiving the medical assistance that they will need if they keep smoking, because in Mexico and in these kind of countries, smokers suffer twice, or suffer two aspects of the damages from smoking. They suffer the illness itself, the consequences from smoking, but they also suffer the consequences of poor medical services. So it aggravates their situation, and what the Mexican government is doing, they are depriving us of these alternatives. And if they put it in the Constitution, it's going to be almost impossible to revert, because you will need the same ruling party to vote against something they have already voted. They are not going to acknowledge that they made a mistake. I mean, I hope they do, but it's very likely that they won't.